Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coproduce Care's Chat for Care. And of course, throughout October, we've been doing a series of webinars and live streams around Black History Month. So here's another one. So welcome. My name's Sophie Chester-Glynn, and I'm the director at Coproduce Care. And I'm delighted Cedi Frederick and Tricia Pereira. And I'm just such a huge fan of both of these people, and I'm so excited to spend the next hour with them. But just a little bit of an introduction for you. So Cedi is chair at North Middlesex University Hospital NHS Trust. He's also a coach and results mentor. Cedi has worked as a non-executive director of several NHS Foundation trusts and also been chief executive of a Barnet charity supporting people with learning disabilities, autism and mental health problems, as well as MD of a BAME housing association. And there's so much more to Cedi, and I'm going to allow him to elaborate on some of the things that we've missed, but that's a bit of an intro for now on him. And Tricia Pereira. Tricia is a qualified social worker, practice educator and best interest assessor with over 15 years experience spanning adults and children's social care and within the voluntary sector. She's currently the head of operations, adult social care and adult safeguarding at London Borough of Merton, and hosts leadership events for the South East London Teaching Partnership. So, but of course, one of the main reasons that I really got involved with both of them was through the task force that was started, the COVID-19 Social Care Task Force headed by David Pearson. There was a subgroup, there were several subgroups advising that main task force, and they had both co-chaired the task force looking at BAME and the community experiences within social care during the COVID period, and also some fantastic recommendations from that. So I really glad to have them, not only to talk about their experiences, about Black History Month, but also to critically reflect on the advisory group and what was done, to talk to you about how it was done, some learning, some lessons learned, and also what we might hope for the future, as of course things do heat up again with COVID-19. So it should be really informative, really exciting. And as always, do bring people along. Of course, people can watch back. But if you're watching us on YouTube, then don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And you can get updates if you click on the bell. But also, if you're on Facebook, then like our page, share, reshare the link on Twitter, and of course do follow us because we have a lot coming up. And just to give you a flavour of that, next week we'll be talking to another two very inspirational people, Dudley Sayer and Clinton Farquharson, who you may or may not know, but you will know more about if you join us next week, next Wednesday on the 28th of October. So obviously it is Black History Month, and I've been engaging with what's been going on. It's wonderful to have a month where we kind of appreciate people in our history, always thinking, why don't we do this more? It should be Black History Month and plus and beyond. But it is still really good to reflect. And one of the people that I came across recently, which I'd like to share with you, is Una Marson. So Una's Jamaican born, and she was best known for being the first Black female broadcaster at the BBC from 1939 to 1946. She also invested much of her time as a poet, publisher and activist for racial and sexual equality. She was secretary to the League of Coloured Peoples, as well as many other organisations, including the Women's International League for Peace. And here is a little bit of an example of her talking. And I love looking at these old videos because everyone sounds different and everyone looks so smart. But the BBC did actually post something about her recently, a few days ago, and that's how I kind of stumbled across it. But just to give it a start, I'll give you a flavour of what she did back then.
We're all ready for you, Miss Marson.
Thank you, Tommy.
Hello, West Indies. This is Una Marston calling you from London. Tonight, we're having a special party, a party that's being filmed. Instead of our usual greetings, I'm going to ask some of these West Indians here to tell you something about our work in this country. First of all, here are Pilot Officer Ulrich Cross and Aircraft Woman Wendy Ince. Ulrich, suppose you tell us something about the work West Indians are doing in the Royal Air Force.
Well, West Indies, it's a job to know where to start. I am attached to one of our own bomber squadrons, but there are so many of us doing so many different things.
And I'm going to play on the outro some more from that clip. And I think it's just a reminder that, especially in the last clip I'm going to show at the end of the show, that a lot of people from the West Indies who are here, our mums, our dads, Windrush generation, were asked to come and help in the war effort and help the country do so much. And I think some of the things that the report that Tricia and Cedi will talk about will highlight is how little we are actually supporting their families right now through COVID, when we're affected so much by this, and how much more we need to consider why people were here in the first place and what we did to support the country, and in different efforts, in the war effort, in social care now, in health, nurses and hospitals, and just reflecting back and remembering sort of the history behind it all, I think is really insightful. Anyway, that's enough of me reminiscing. I'm going to bring in our two guests. Good evening, both.
Hi, Sophie.
Hello. I know, Cedi, you're not feeling too well. You've got a bit of a man flu, so thank you for being with us. Tricia, how are you?
I'll be fine. Thank you.
Hi,
Tricia, good evening, Sophie.
Lovely to have you both here. So I tried to read out as much as I could in a short period of time what you're doing and the space that you're in right now, but I think you both could have a full hour just going through all the things you're doing in this space, in health and social care. But is there anything that I missed that would help viewers sort of tell them a bit about what you're doing at the moment? Maybe Cedi, start us off.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Sophie got most of my background right, but in addition to having run a social care provider supporting people with learning disabilities, autism and mental health problems for 12 years, I then went on to run a large care provider based in Kent that provided primarily services for older people. So residential care for people with dementia and home care. I've got 30 plus years of non-executive director experience, as Sophie mentioned, including within the NHS, and I'm honoured to be chair at North Middlesex. So a bit more about me.
Great, thank you. And Tricia, anything more from you?
Hi, I think I'm the first Black chair of the Adults Principal Social Workers Network. I was a principal social worker for many years, and that's something that I was really proud of, being the first Black co-chair, because as we know, senior leadership in social care isn't necessarily as representative of the workforce as it could have been, and that inspired me to stand as co-chair. So I'm currently doing a number of initiatives with the Chief Social Worker's Office, and one of the things is developing the workforce race equality standards, similar to they have in the NHS, and this will be across social care. So hopefully I can come back and chat with you some more about that, Sophie, at another time.
Well, that sounds very exciting. And we're speaking to the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care tomorrow morning, and I was going to ask her whether she thought there should be a res for social care. Like, you kind of spoilt it for me now, unless she doesn't know about it.
Well, this is being led, it's a piece of work being led by the Chief Social Worker's Office in the Department of Health and Social Care, and it's now crossed over to the Chief Social Worker for Children's Social Care as well. So we're looking at it sector-wide. Yeah, it's quite exciting.
Oh, wonderful. That is exciting. That's really exciting. And even more exciting, probably just from my point of view, though, is we've asked everybody, all our panelists who come on to our shows in October, to think about inspirational figures, people in Black history now or any time really, who they can talk to us about, who's influenced them. So I've asked both of you, and I'm really excited to hear about your inspirational figure. So Cedi, maybe I can start off with yours.
Thank you. When I was asked to think about my inspirational figure, immediately, as many would, the likes of Nelson Mandela came to mind, Martin Luther King, Mary Seacole, Barack Obama. But then I reflected and thought, well, actually, who really made a difference to me? And it may surprise people that I settled on someone that many of our younger audience may not have heard of, a chap called John Shaft. In the early 70s, there were very, very few Black film stars, role models, people that you could relate to. I was a young lad in South London, and along with some friends of mine, we snuck into the ABC cinema in Catford, and we watched a film called Shaft. And basically, this was a guy who broke all the rules. He was charismatic, he had the perfect afro. He got the girl, can I say? And he just made us all feel almost superhuman. We came out of that cinema all feeling 10 feet tall, nothing could stop us. And I carried that for many, many years. So in terms of my personal inspiration, someone who really affected my thinking and my approach to life, John Shaft.
I think that's fantastic. And when you first told me about it, I was like, I was scratching my head. And that's just me, because I'm not particularly cultured. I don't watch many videos. I need to get that sorted. But then I heard the clip and I was like, yes, I recognize the music. So for anyone who's wondering, let's bring up that clip. Great. I love it. It's brilliant. I mean, it is fun, but also, is there something in that to do with what people are well aware of, the idea of representation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess the modern day equivalent, Sophie, was the impact that Black Panther had on a whole generation of Black people who saw, perhaps for many of them for the first time, a very different perspective on race, control, and from what I've gathered, has really impacted on the lives of so many Black people. So if you go back to 1971, as a 14-year-old, it had that effect on me. And of course, there are many films that followed in that particular genre. So very, very, very important to me.
Yeah, I just think it's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's brought a little bit of fun, I think, to the live stream tonight. So thank you. I'm going to bring in Tricia now to talk about her inspirational figure. So Tricia, can you talk to us about your inspirational figure for Black History Month?
Yeah, well, I'm inspired by a lot of people, like Cedi had mentioned. But when I really thought about it, I thought, who's inspired me the most in my career, in my life, just daily? And actually, it's my parents. I had a brilliant childhood. I'm the last child of my siblings. And my parents really, they had a belief in all of us as children and that we could do whatever we wanted to do. They really encouraged us to take chances, to take opportunities, to really just embrace life and live. So actually tonight, I thought again, I thought my mum's probably my biggest inspiration. She was a mental health nurse for many years, and as she had children, she worked nights. So that's her as a young woman, doing her nursing duties. She worked in a big Victorian institution, and we used to go to the Christmas parties. We used to be very involved. At that time, the NHS really took care of families and of the nurses and the staff. They did lots of day trips and summer trips and things like that. And growing up in the Midlands, it's quite a tight-knit community of people who've come from the Caribbean. So we all kind of knew each other. And my mum just had a sense of fire in her. I mean, Cedi talked about Shaft, but my mum could have been the ultimate Foxy Brown in those days. You know, she had her afro. She just didn't take any messing. She raised her children. She just is my inspiration and is still my inspiration, and still believes in us as children and believes in me. And it's just, she says to me, Tricia, of all of my children, who would have thought you would be the one that would end up working in the Department of Health? And I'm never quite sure how to take that. I wasn't that rebellious, or maybe I was. but yeah, she's my inspirational figure. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. And I definitely rings a bell with me and my experience. My mum was a nurse, a psychiatric nurse who also worked in several large institutions, and then settled in Bristol, worked in Glenside, which people now know as Blackberry Hill Hospital, which is now Flats. So yeah, it's a long history of our families having done some kind of work, whether it's in hospitals or anything really. My uncle's was a bus driver, my dad's taxi driver. It's just lovely to hear people's history really and how that's influenced them. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to talk about your experiences professionally in being Black and working in health and social care. I know, Tricia, you talked about being the only Black is a Black woman, did you say?
Yeah,
as well,
person.
Yeah.
As the coach.
So how has that has it affected you, or you know, do you notice that? Does that kind of scream out to you when you're in meetings? Does it make a difference to you?
Yeah, it's very noticeable. Always, but in 2017, the Principal Social Workers Network did a Freedom of Information request to all of the councils across England, and they were looking at the makeup of senior leaders, so directors, assistant directors, principal social workers, and the report really just highlighted what many of us knew already, because when you go to meetings, when you go to conferences, you can see you're the only one of 3 or 4. And we're talking about local authorities. There must be, 200 across the country? So it's very visible. And I used to say to my mum, oh, when I go to these meetings at the Department of Health, I'm always the only one, or I'm always the only one of 2. And, you know, you kind of stand out and they put you to the front to sit so that the room looks a bit more diverse. But you look behind you and it's just like, you know, it's you and one other. And I remember my mum said to me, Tricia, why are you complaining? You're in the room. So when you're in the room, make sure you have something sensible to say. Make sure you really use the opportunity, because you stand out. They'll notice you. Use the opportunity to get your voice heard. Don't be worried about being the only one in the room. Just make sure that you turn up and you talk sensibly. So she made me realize, she said, talk some sense. And she made me realize, yeah, it is an opportunity to really influence things and to change how perhaps policy is being written or guidance is being put together. And before every meeting, I still talk to her. I say, I'm going to this meeting. And afterwards, I always say to her, I'm doing this policy or that policy. And she gives me some great advice still. So, so it can be very lonely, but it has meant that I've been invited into various arenas. And there's an initiative called a +1 initiative, in that if you, as a BAME leader or member of an organisation, if you're invited into a meeting or an event, then you can bring a +1 along with you. So I try to bring a colleague, a Black and minority ethnic background colleague along with me. So I'm opening doors to other people.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Is that just within social work or?
No, I saw it on LinkedIn. So I think it started in America, and a lot of large corporations have this +1. So if you're invited to something, bring somebody along with you as
Right.
your guest or an observer, and you're introducing them in the room, and you're doing some like modeling, some coaching, some peer mentoring, but you're opening their network as well as your own. So that's what I try to do.
That's a great idea. Cedi, have you noticed any either discrimination or unconscious bias, or just had the feeling that you have to just speak up and speak out more, like Tricia was saying?
Well, I think it's not uncommon. Like Tricia, many times I've felt the only one. When you build a career and you get to chief executive level in social care, there are very, very few BAME or BME chief executives, right the way through to when you go to a conference, you look around and yes, you are the only one. And it's something that you recognize and you carry, and sometimes you carry it lightly, other times it can be a real pressure because you do feel conscious, you do feel like you are under greater scrutiny than other people in the room. There's less margin for error in terms of your contribution, what you do. As a chief executive running an organization, it's success and failure and lessons that you learn. It's interesting now, I mentioned that I'm currently chair of an NHS trust. I think if you include ambulance trusts, mental health trusts, community trusts, there's something like 240 odd in the country, 250 in the country, and there are only 10 BAME chairs across the country.
Wow.
I was told, I haven't had the time or energy to check, but I was told that I am the only Afro-Caribbean male chair in the country. So one must never lose sight of the symbolism, especially in an environment like the NHS, especially over the last 6 months or so, where there's been a greater recognition and effort being made to improve diversity at certainly senior levels. And it's interesting that, the res has been mentioned. That's been a real factor in the NHS for several years. So it's something that you never get used to, you never quite become comfortable with. But I think it's a responsibility that we have to take, because we are role models. People see us in these positions and they think, well, actually, if he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as Charles is great for you, then you can be inspiring so many other people. So absolutely can relate to that. But the only other thing I wanted to ask before we get on to the report was, do you feel there's extra pressure? Do you feel in these times when there's constant news, and it's usually negative news around culture, ethnicity, stuff in the news today, which I haven't really engaged with, which one of the MPs was talking about around Black Lives Matters and representing that in schools. And there's constant things that are bombarded that are negative, which can weigh you down a little bit. And also, I know we've all talked about being so busy because this is an opportunity where we can do things like this on an evening and do other things to help others. What about our own well-being? Do you feel like the pressure sometimes is just a little bit too much, or are you managing to balance it? Cedi, maybe you've got some thoughts first.
Well, I think the biggest challenge for us at the moment across the country is we've been unable to find a way to have a national discussion. So what we've got are polarized positions on both ends of the continuum, so to speak. So the MP who spoke today immediately was catalyst for a polarized discussion. People from the Black Lives Matter movement, very passionate, very powerfully expressing their concerns, historic and current, but we don't have a framework in which we can have a balanced dialogue where people can accept what they don't know without being defensive. And I think that unless we have that, we are going to continue with this back and forth. And I'm worried that we're not going to make the kind of progress as a country that we need to make. So I think events like this, and there are more and more of them, are becoming increasingly important because they open up opportunities for conversations, different perspectives, and it begins a discussion at different levels. So I welcome this, and I thank you, Sophie, and your colleagues for organising events like this because they're really, really important.
Tricia?
Yeah, I think we have started to experience a certain sense of backlash. And if I'm thinking about the social care workforce, I can remember when it was first made public that people of Black and minority ethnic background were more vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19. And we were really quite focused on risk assessments and ensuring that people had the right support, they had the right PPE, they had the right equipment, because of course, social workers, social care workers, we're going out in the community. And there was some sense of challenge or disgruntlement as to why are they so, why are we so special? Why do we need enhanced risk assessments? Why do we need enhanced PPEs? Why? So it was trying to capture everybody's anxiety, but actually being unapologetic and saying, look, the research is showing us this. We have a huge part of the workforce which is inadvertently affected. So it was a sense of trying to educate people rather than alienate people. But it has been an interesting set of conversations, and those conversations are still ongoing. But yeah, we are. I think it's something that we do have to stand up and just challenge those ideologies and challenge those conversations when they're happening. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think maybe it now needs to be featured in up to our new way of being, is just being ready to challenge these things. And I know some people, it is hard because you do feel worn down by it because this constant barrage of whether it's MPs or whether it's in the press or Twitter or whatever, or even then personal conversations between friends. But it does necessarily, I think, need to become part. We need to create that framework Cedi was talking about. And then we'll kind of get used to it until we start seeing change. And I've been really surprised with how much change has been happening in such a very short period of time. I've never known anything like it. But what you said about showing people the evidence was a brilliant segue. I didn't even prepare you for this, but we have a couple of things of almost to kind of highlight why the task force, the subgroup that you were involved with was necessary. This is something that we pulled up from the ONS, and they were looking at the statistics based on age, sex, and ethnicity of people who were dying from COVID, and this was back in May. And of course, you can see there that you've got Black people, Bangladeshi people, Pakistani people compared to the deaths for white people. It's just a huge there's a huge difference really, and it kind of the stats are there for everybody to see why we need to address this issue. So like you were saying, Tricia, when people were kind of questioning, well, why do we need to concentrate on this particular part of the population? We're all human, or some people might say all lives matter. And obviously, but some people are affected more than others for whatever reason. So there is a reason to address it. So that is one thing. But also, just before we move on, a clip here from Yvonne Coghill, who you can hear the kind of desperation in her voice when she's saying that we really do need to concentrate on these issues, and we've been trying to get traction on it for so many years. And this is her speaking on Newsnight a few months ago.
But the thing that I mentioned to you about the fact that Black and ethnic minority staff have different experiences across the board isn't about an individual or two individuals. We're talking about a workforce of 1.4 million, with 20% of them from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds. Every year we do a survey asking those people about their experiences in the NHS. And what we get back is consistently that their experiences are very different to their white counterparts. So we can contrast and compare the experiences that Black and ethnic minority staff have across the whole of the English NHS and the white staff, and it is different. And that has got to be systemic. It cannot be anything other than that. So I wonder when people say things like, well, maybe people feel that they are being victimized, or maybe they feel that things are not the same for them. We have the data, we have the facts to show that actually things are very different for them.
So yes, there is a problem of systemic racism within the NHS.
I think there's a problem of systemic racism across our world. I don't think.
So, yeah, that's Yvonne Coghill just laying it out for us. But yeah, so back to the task force. So it was announced that a social care task force was going to be set up to look at how we combat the virus and social care. And there were various different subgroups. And of course, you both were co-chairing the subgroup on BAME social care and the workforce, as well as in the community, which I loved, that the fact that you were looking at the community and you were looking at the workforce and not delinking the two. I think that made this the report that was put out from the recommendations as well so deep and so holistic, because you recognize that it wasn't just the people who were working in social care, but that they were part of their community and that it all worked together. So I want to move on to you two having a bit of a critical, reflective discussion about the report. And maybe, Cedi, you could start off just giving us some background about how it came about and how you got involved. And then, if you don't mind, both, I'll come out of the stream and just let you two have a 10 minutes or so just reflecting on it, and then I'll pop back in. Does that sound good?
Sounds fine to me.
Lovely. To you.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. So, as Sophie mentioned, a task force was established in early summer, and my takeaway was that that was in response to recognition that social care had not been particularly well served and supported during the first phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the task force was aimed at reflecting on work that had been done previously, but more importantly, preparing social care, learning the lessons from the first wave, and preparing social care for the expected second wave. The task force was chaired by David Pearson, and within the task force, there were 8 advisory groups, of which the BAME Communities Advisory Group was one. So there were workforce, learning disabilities, older people, people who pay for their own care and support, a whole range of task force. What was really interesting from my perspective, and I'm sure Sophie will have a view on this, was that we couldn't help but think that our advisory group was a bit of an afterthought. There was definitely BAME connotations, BAME issues across all of the other advisory groups, but clearly someone thought, actually, we need to bring all that together and bring together a group. And Sophie and I, forgive me, Tricia and I were asked to chair that group to look specifically at issues around BAME staff and BAME communities. So, Tricia, maybe you want to share some thoughts about how you were approached to chair this advisory group?
Well, I was invited to attend a meeting, and it was during the meeting they were talking about, as you said, Cedi, around social care and preparing for winter and looking at the pandemic and what had happened previously, and how certain groups of people were supported, how care homes were supported, and it was a general meeting, and it was very interesting. And then after the meeting, I was invited to meet with David Pearson, who, as you said, is the chair of the task force. And we were having another conversation, another discussion, and I was really getting into it. He was asking me lots of questions. I didn't realise that that was an interview of sorts. And at the end of the conversation, he said to me, "Oh, I'm really pleased that you've been nominated." And I thought, "Oh, nominated for what?" And he said, "I'm nominated to be one of the co-chairs for an advisory group looking at BAME communities and the BAME workforce." And I was a little bit unprepared. I was a little bit surprised, and I thought, "Oh, wow." So it happened quite organically. But you're right. One of the things that I noticed was people who were in the initial meeting, later I found out that they were the co-chairs of the other 7 advisory groups. So it seems as though they were established many weeks before our group was actually even put together. And then I was informed, "Oh, your co-chair will be this gentleman called Cedi Frederick. Are you aware of him? Do you know who he is?" I thought, "Oh, no idea. Who could this person be?" So a quick Google search led me to understand a bit about your background and the work that you're doing a little bit better. And I think it was the next morning, early morning, that we actually met. So it happened really quickly. We met on a Teams meeting at about 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I remember your opening words to me was, "I've only ever co-chaired once in my career, and it wasn't a great experience."
Yeah, sorry about that. Maybe I should have been
That was a challenge.
a bit more circumspect.
No, that was a challenge to me, because I thought, we're going to get on, because we have a task in hand. We've got a job to do, and you know what? We're going to get on just fine.
It's interesting because in parallel, I'd been approached separately by the chief social worker, and again, I wasn't too sure what was required of me. Next thing I know, I'm in a discussion with you. But we did get on from the start, and it was one of these strange situations that I think was really important, because unless we were able to do that, we wouldn't have achieved anything like as much as we achieved. Because, as you mentioned, other task groups had been formed and had been working for weeks. And our task group, a bit like an afterthought, effectively, we were asked to initially find a group, no advice, just find a group, come together, hold meetings, write a report with recommendations in a week.
In a week.
We said that was impossible, and we managed to negotiate a second week.
Yeah.
So within 2 weeks, we had to find people who could join us, who could add value to our group, create a project plan, decide how we're going to take it forward. And it was interesting because when we started bringing people in through your networks, my networks, it was very, very clear very early on that we had formed a collective mission, basically, that we were not going to fail. And it was almost as if everything that we talked about earlier in terms of our professional careers, feeling under pressure, everyone in the group felt that.
Yeah.
And we said that our work was going to be unimpeachable. It was going to be outstanding. So we were able to bring people like Sophie in, Geraldine McMurtry from HC1, Godfred Bohan, a brilliant researcher, policy guy from, I think, ADAS, and a whole range of other people came on board.
Yeah.
But we realized that we couldn't just sit around or virtually have a discussion and come up with recommendations that had any weight. So maybe you want to talk about how we developed the surveys, the 2 consultation events.
Mm-hmm. So we knew from the outset that we had to capture the voice of people who were being affected. We'd seen things on the news, we'd seen reports in the papers, we'd seen what was happening. As I said at the beginning, I'm from the Midlands, I'm from Leicester. So it was in the middle of the outbreak of COVID in Leicester. So for me, it was quite a personal thing. My family's there. And I could see the research that was happening in Leicester. So we had Professor Ivan Brown from Public Health. We had Professor Kamlesh Kunti, also from Leicester University. And we knew we had to be very outward facing. So we had to talk to people, we had to talk to the public, we had to talk to the workforce, we had to talk to researchers and policymakers, we had to talk to community leaders, and we had to think, how are we going to do this in 2 weeks, write reports and recommendations? And you know what? When you're putting a crack team together, you have to pick people with the right skills that complement each other, that have the right strengths. So, as you said, we had Godfred, who is an academic. He's a great scribe. We have Sophie, who is really good at engaging with the workforce and communities. We had you and I, who would conduct interviews with people and set up these interviews at very short notice. And I was really impressed that people like directors of Public Health England, who have very busy schedules, that we were able to contact them and say, look, we're doing this piece of work. Can you meet with us? We're available from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. We knew we would have to put the time in and the hours in. So one of the things that was really important, I think, for all of us was the voice of people of the community and how we were going to capture those. And you know, technology is an amazing thing. So we were able to set up 2 separate engagement sessions within 72 hours on Zoom. One session focused on the workforce and people who are working in social care and their Black and minority ethnic background, and one session for people who were receiving services and their carers and their family members. And at the same time, parallel to that, we had to then set up a questionnaire and a survey, which we did through a national survey, may I add, across England, which spanned all the local authorities and regions. And we had an amazing response. People who responded to the survey, people who joined the Zoom meetings that we had to host. We had to capture their voices and really do it justice and make sure that that any recommendations that we pull together, you could really feel that it was from the people. We spoke to the Muslim Council of Great Britain, the Sikh Council, the African churches, the Jewish deputies of England. We talked to various other faith groups and community leaders. And one of the key messages was that engaging with the local community is a way forward for the government. And now you can see in the news, it's been all over the news this morning with what's happening in Manchester and Yorkshire. They are taking a more localized approach and localized response. Now, it's, yeah, when we think about the conversations that are being had around Manchester, it is an interesting time, but I like to think that we have perhaps influenced that the government is having more localized conversations and localized responses now. One of our recommendations talked about the government being more culturally competent, really reaching out and engaging with the communities. We talked about trusted people and trusted places. And these are things that are now starting to come through. So it was a bit of a whirlwind wedding, Cedi, but yeah, it was an exciting journey.
Well, this was, of course, in addition to all of our day jobs.
Yeah.
And we were meeting virtually every single day, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were collectively proud that we had really reflected the views of the people that we'd spoken to. I was struck by how many people said we were the first people who had actually reached out to them to ask their views about their experiences of COVID. And that surprised me, having had a lot of input in the NHS. I was quite surprised at how little attention had been given to social care during that first wave. Mm-hmm. And I'm hopeful that we have enabled the management of the second wave from social care's perspective to be much more successful. Just to add, maybe just to conclude, I'm conscious of time, we were insistent that our report be published as a standalone report. It was clear from the task force that not all of the recommendations from all of the advisory groups would get into the main task force report. In the end, there were over 50 recommendations in the task force report, but we were insistent, Tricia and myself were insistent to every single meeting that we went to, that our report should be published and produced as a standalone report. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest successes of our advisory group was the fact that that recommendation was accepted. We had David Pearson's commitment that that report would be produced. It is out there. People can find it, because it's not just 1 or 2 recommendations. There were 10 really important recommendations, which I hope, notwithstanding all the pressures local authorities and other organisations are under, they will look at that report and think, actually, we can use some of this locally. Yes. So from that perspective, I was really, really proud. And Tricia, I'll never forget our last meeting as a group, where we actually had a moment just to reflect on how far we'd come in virtually no time flat. And I think everyone of the group commented on the final draft. So poor Godfred was going back and forth, changing things. But in the end, I, for one, was tremendously proud of the outcome of our advisory group.
Exactly, Cedi. And, you know, somebody said that where this pandemic is concerned, we're all in the same storm, yes, but we're not all in the same boat, you know. And when you think of Titanic as the boat, and there's people in steerage in the 3rd class sector, and then there's people in the lovely shiny rooms, we knew that we had been entrusted to do something for our communities, and we had to, we all had a commitment to really do it justice. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and do you know, I'm still amazed that we have never met in person. We've only met virtually still.
We will meet one day.
One day we will.
And Sophie, I hope you're proud as well, because you are a major contributor to this piece of work.
Well, I think it's absolutely amazing. I think what you did, and you really did sum up everything that I reflect on when I think about it, because you hear in the press that a lot of the other groups had 4 months. Someone was saying on a webinar the other day, I heard them say they had 4 months to prepare their reports. And I remember when you had your first meeting with us all, Cedi, and you said, we've got 2 weeks to get this done, and it may be weekends, it may be evenings, but we've just got to pull this together. Like, you just set the tone straight away. You understood the challenge. You were like, come on, troops, let's do this. and you all pulled it. But it wasn't as case of, right, everyone else is kind of running around like headless chickens and you guys were just having meetings with the big guys. You were actually just putting in, both of you, the legwork the whole time as well. So I felt working in the group, everyone, it was a great example of co-producing ideas, always going back to the group. Do you think this is a good idea? Including community members, including people, everybody's voice mattered. And it wasn't something you even said, you just made everyone feel that everyone had a point. Very inclusive. And I took away from it, I thought, this is the way that you need to galvanize any type of movement. And at the end of it, you had a product. And I have put the link in the chat for everyone to look at some of the recommendations. This is a lovely screenshot what you put on Twitter with one of the groups that we had. Thumbs up from Tricia. Everyone there scribbling away, thinking, contemplating. So that was one of the webinars that we had. And also, there's a few of the recommendations we've got as screenshots. Again, the first one, recommendation 1, this work must continue. 100%. This is what it needs to go on and think about. Improving things and keeping things going, and also I'm just picking up random ones. We've kind of like summarized. People with lived experience as well should be at the forefront, and that's absolutely what you did, especially when we did the webinar and we listened to carers and people who were of the communities. It was so rich. That experience, can you talk a bit about the experience of talking to people from different communities whose first language wasn't English, and the support that their community gave them and what you learned? I don't know who wants to start off with that one.
So
for me, sorry, Tricia,
no, carry on, Cedi. No.
For me, there were times when I got quite emotional listening to people's stories. We were able to speak to a group in Coventry of people who volunteered to support each other in the community, and the level of trust within that group, the lady who coordinated it, everyone knew who she was trusted. She took that responsibility very, very seriously. She was working as a volunteer 7 days a week, supporting people who were shielding, doing shopping, collection, all sorts of things. And when we heard some of the stories from staff as well, you couldn't help but feel quite emotional at times, and I certainly did. And that really, I think, spurred me on through this process. I mean, I would commend Tricia, because Tricia organised a lot of the discussions that we had with the senior leaders in public health, Kevin Fenton and others. So that's how I saw it. I don't know, Tricia, from your perspective, how you saw it.
Yes, I was really impressed when we spoke to the faith groups and community leaders, just how they were able to mobilise really quickly. And they were saying they put out calls for volunteers and they were inundated with volunteers. But the thing is, there wasn't the infrastructure around how they would even manage these volunteers. So they were really concerned about PPE and risk assessing and supporting people who were volunteering and going out into the communities and going out to people's homes. So one of the recommendations was, yes, you're putting out a call for mutual aid for volunteers, but the government really needs to support these community groups so that they have got the infrastructure, they have got the support around how to work with so many volunteers. They had thousands. That was really impressive. It was also impressive to hear that from the Jewish deputies who said that because ethnicity wasn't recorded or isn't recorded on the death certificates, they were unsure of how many people of Jewish faith were dying. So every time there was a death in the community up and down the country, they would ask the funeral homes to log and let them know if COVID was mentioned in as part of the death. and they started to collect their own statistics, and they realized that there were more Jewish people dying in England than there were affected in Israel. And that made them think their community has a real problem here. So one of our recommendations was to have ethnicity recorded on the death certificates, because again, remember, it wasn't until way into the first wave of the pandemic that we knew that people of ethnic minority backgrounds were adversely affected, because it just wasn't being recorded, it wasn't being captured. So local communities were not able to prepare themselves. And that's something that we make very strongly. We want ethnicity recorded on death certificates so that people's individualness is recognised.
Mm-hmm. And there was one other thing I know you were very passionate about, Tricia, and that was the risk reduction framework, and having risk assessments for people. And one of the survey that was put together for this report highlighted some issues about, are people aware of the risk reduction framework? And huge majority weren't. Is it being used? And a lot of people weren't using it. And it was similar to what would be your top priority to improve support for people of colour receiving social care during a pandemic. And a lot of people were saying more support networks for BAME or non-white, whichever term you prefer, for more people and communities. So definitely that your recommendations need to be really looked at. And thinking about the future, do you feel, are you having talks, or have you heard on the grapevine that anything might be taken forward, or is it still too early to see what might happen from the reports?
The chief social workers office, as I said, they're working on various initiatives, and one of them is the continuation of this work, but we haven't had a formal confirmation yet. But we are very keen to capture how the recommendations are being implemented and how they're being embedded. So even if the government isn't formally carrying this on, I think Cedi and I have a commitment to revisit the work and just look at how this is being implemented. I think we made a great start. We need to continue with the momentum. This is a legacy that we're able to leave behind. When this is all said and done and people sit back and are asked, or they think about, what did you do? I want to be able to say that I worked with a great team of people and we pulled something together that was just amazing as a team, and we were able to make a difference.
Wonderful. And Cedi, we're coming up to 8 o'clock now. So any final thoughts or reflections from you?
I think what I'm hoping to see is as much attention being given to social care during the expected second wave of this pandemic as is being given to the NHS. As I mentioned earlier, as chair of an NHS trust, we're living this every single day, and I'm very much aware of how much attention, effort and resources are being directed to the NHS. Rightly so, understandably so. But what I'm hoping to see through my networks with the local authorities that we work with as a trust, that as much time, resources and attention is being given to social care as to the NHS. And at some point, there is going to be an inquiry at some point. And to support Tricia's point, I want to be able to, if I'm invited to speak to that inquiry or to observe or whatever, to know that actually we made a contribution to moving this agenda forward.
Yeah.
So the lessons that were learnt in the first wave were taken forward and used in the second wave.
Great, thank you so much for that. Tricia, I should come back to you and just ask you for any final thoughts.
No, My final actually thing was, Sophie, I remember you started a petition around parity for social care. And this was months ago. It was at the start of the pandemic. And so I want to just say thank you for everything that you have been doing and that you've been doing with Coproduce Care, and for these interviews and conversations that you have. I do not know how you pack it all in, but you're giving us a platform to raise our voices even more. So thank you for all the work that you've done.
Oh, that's wonderful. You both are just so wonderful.
And my thanks as well. Absolutely.
And it's just great to have you both on here. It's been a pleasure having you here. And I feel like the hour has just whizzed by. It's just gone so quickly. And it's been so easy and so lovely. But I must let you go. I know, Tricia, you're still in the office. And Cedi, you need to have some rest because you've got man flu, as you described it on Twitter. So thank you both so very, very much. I can't wait to watch this back. And we'll be sharing clips. And do feel free to share anyone who's watching now or in the future. So thank you both very, very much.
Very, very much indeed. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
So there you go, two very inspirational people. And as you can see, they are just wonderful to have on this live stream and wonderful to talk to and work with. So just before everybody does go, I know that we are slightly over time, but I just want to remind you that tomorrow we've got quite a bit of a packed live stream, 10 o'clock, so earlier than we normally do. Than we are doing more in the day at the moment rather than in the evening, and that is with Kate Tironi and friends. So Kate Tironi, as many of you will know, is the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care for the Care Quality Commission, the CQC, the regulator of adult social care. And she will be going through what was released on Friday, the State of Care report, which is an annual report that they bring out, and they talk about different areas in health and social care, so GP services, but also care homes and maternity services, and how they've done over the pandemic. And they look at reports, they've actually been very comprehensive in their report. They've spoken to people, they've used their inspections, and they report on what's happening in the sector at the moment. So I'm really looking forward to her questions, that we've had some questions for her, but also her talking about it. After she's talked for about half an hour tomorrow morning, we're going to speak to a packed panel. We're going to have two panels because we've got so many people. I've never had so many panelists before, and you can see them up there. So you can, if you're watching on YouTube, just subscribe and click the bell and you'll be able to get a reminder. Clicking the bell is the important bit. And if you're on Facebook, then you can right, I think I'm back. Sorry, let's hope that doesn't happen tomorrow morning. But I've got my hearty team in the background tomorrow morning, so we should be okay. That was my internet. Sorry about that. So that's just a reminder on Kate Tironi tomorrow morning. But just to end this off, I did say that I was going to come back to Una, who we had a clip from earlier in the stream. And this is her also inviting somebody onto the BBC radio to talk about people coming over and supporting in the war efforts in World War II. So here is the outro, and hopefully see many of you tomorrow morning if you can make it. But of course, you can watch back on the link anytime. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
This is Una Boston introducing West Indians in Britain. First of all, here is Larry Constantine, the world-famous cricketer. Larry used to be just a summer visitor, but when the war began, he became a welfare officer to the Ministry of Labor.
Hello, everybody. This is Larry Constantine. I'd like to say a few words about the many hundreds of West Indians who have come over here to help on the factory front. Here in a training center in the north of England are 82 of them. People from all walks of life, including doctors, lawyers, reporters from the West Indies. They're being taught side by side with Englishmen and women to operate all the latest types of machinery. In 16 weeks, they must know how to read blueprints, micrometers, slide rules, to set up and operate lathes, capstans, drills, and grinders. When their training is complete, they will go to aircraft or ordnance factories or machine shops. There are also others from several West Indian islands who volunteered and were chosen for their skill, and on arrival were immediately introduced into production in the united effort to beat Hitler and his gang.
War is in the air, all West Indians will do their share. That is why they came, and not seeking glory or fame. They will fight, fight for victory, let us raise a cheer. They will fight, fight on.